Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer 40k lore, where today we're going to cover a subject that I cannot believe I hadn't actually already covered: the Striking Scorpions. These are by far my favourite Eldar units, both in terms of looks, sheer aesthetics, style, and application. The idea of Eldar heavy infantry, with chainswords and pistols worked into their masks. That is really damn cool. And to make them even cooler is of course the fact that the founder, the creator, the original Phoenix Lord of the Striking Scorpions is now a Dark Eldar. Indeed, he is the founder of the Incubus Order, the Dark Eldar's own heavy elite shock troops. And yet, despite being so goddamn cool, the Striking Scorpions never get to take a role in anything. Oh well, I guess we got them in Dawn of War 3. Excuse me, I need to go pour bleach in my eyes real quick. But first, a word from our favorite sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. The groundbreaking dungeon-exploring strategy game is now holding its 3rd anniversary. And so, in honor of it, let me show you my top 3 champions, starting with my very first legendary, Eldar Skarg. He's a sentimental pick, I admit, yet nevertheless his combination of AoE fear and ability to spread damage over time, burn effects against all the spiders, and the spider boss makes this old-timer useful even after all of this time. My number 2 is Xavier, the venomous dark elf that is all about synergy. Lay on the poison and watch her wipe out entire waves of enemies with a single ability, as she detonates all the poison stacks instantly. An invaluable asset wherever there are mobs that need clearing. And last but not least, number 3, Coldheart. A simple, rare champion, she should pale in comparison to the legendaries, but not at all. Her Heartseeker abilities damage scales with the enemy's HP, making her a consummate boss killer and a low-rarity, high-impact champion. Now, as mentioned, it is Raid's 3rd anniversary, and to celebrate, the month will be stuffed full of bonus goods for all players, new and old alike, plus tons of events, competitions, and content. New champions, new artifacts, and coolest of all, a personalized video where every player gets an awesome rundown of their exploits in Raid. With all of these events going, I am currently enjoying delving into the dungeons for loot and points unlock greater rewards still, especially the Dragon, where crucial speed gear can be wrested from the Fire Lizard's greedy grip. Time is most certainly ripe, you see. You can use the link in the description below or the QR code to join the raid now. New players get a massive welcome pack with 3 free champions and XP boosts to get them going. And all players have access to the promo code 3YearsRaid on screen now, which can be entered here for even more goodies. So again, click the link in the description down below, and as always, you will find your rewards here in the inbox. Let us move on then to the topic of the Striking Scorpions. As mentioned, they have never got enough love, in my opinion. And a great deal of the reason for this is because they are rather difficult to represent well, either in tabletop or video game format, because they are indeed heavy shock assault infantry, but in the Eldar way. They are not space marines that roar across the battlefield on literal jets of fire shooting out of jump packs. They are stealth predators. The name Striking Scorpions implies this as well. The very idea is that they will close with the target using camouflage, cover, or even darkness straight up to get near the enemy, and then rush the last few dozen yards to their positions and overwhelm them in a frenzied tear of short-range rapid-fire weaponry and screaming chainswords. Their aspect is intended to be represented as a patient hunter that tears down their enemies in a sudden burst of merciless and overwhelmingly one-sided violence. but again, difficult to represent in a 1-hour tabletop game or a 20-minute bout of Dawn of War 2. That's where the series ended, by the way, in case you were curious. And additionally as well, this particular choice of tactic is not merely elected because it appears effective. If they were to be simple shock troops, then the Eldar already have the Howling Banshees, which, tragically, have for a very long time outcompeted the poor little Scorpions. But instead, this aspect of them both gives them a specialization, of course, which is the point of the Eldar aspect warriors, and it is also an element of their psyche, and a doctrine evolved specifically to protect the Eldar who embark upon this path from the darkness that claimed their founder. One of the first Phoenix Lords, Ar-Hra, the father of Scorpions, or, more fittingly in my opinion, the Fallen Phoenix. Ar-Hra, alongside the original Phoenix Lords, were the foundations upon which Azurman built his idea of the Path of the Warrior, which would see aspect warrior shrines popping up on all of the craftworlds that had survived the birth of Slaanesh. And this was not merely just a tactical consideration, it was also as a way of defending the Eldar's psyche when they had to engage in warfare for an extended period of time. Now, of course, this affects all the aspect warrior shrines, the Howling Banshees, the Dire Avengers, the Dark Reapers, etc., etc. But the Striking Scorpions are probably particularly exposed on their path, shall we say. Now, all Eldar are of course expected to serve in the militia, in the Guardians, and this is the primary way in which they defend their corporeal realms, their craft worlds, etc. But the path of the warrior is something completely different. The Guardians are short-term service, called up as and when required for limited deployments, whereas the aspect warriors dedicate themselves to a particular path, both for, of course, tactical reasons, to allow the Eldar war machine to function as the intricate machinery that it is, but also to provide them with focus and guidance to limit their experience and their connection to the warrior path. As I've talked about previously, the Eldar consider someone lost to the warrior path as a great tragedy. When an Eldar grows so attached to warfare that he can no longer move on from that profession onto something else, as most Eldar are expected to pick up a craft, then work towards its perfection, and then put it back down again, pick up another craft, and so on, constantly keeping their minds challenged and on different matters, since it was the Eldar's tendency to take things to the extreme that led to the birth of Slaanesh. Now, for other professions, this isn't really a problem because, well, there's only so much excess you can put into pottery making. But in warfare, obviously, excess can turn rather bad rather quickly. But of course, not all killing is equal. A Dark Reaper who preferably only ever sees his target through advanced scopes is not going to feel the impact of the act anywhere near as much as a Striking Scorpion who is tearing the enemy apart with a chain weapon. The modern day Striking Scorpions go to great lengths and take a fair bit of pain in ensuring that this part of their aspect is diluted and watered down by that of the patient hunter, the idea of stalking the prey, the idea of patiently awaiting the correct moment to strike, placing as much emphasis on the approach to a target as the actual neutralization of it. But Ar-Hra had a very different philosophy. For him, the Striking Scorpions were shock troops. They were to charge at the enemy at the highest speed possible, get in there, and rip, tear, and shred them limb from limb until bathed in gore and blood. There was very little artistry in Ar-Hra's way of war, and there was certainly not a whole lot of patience. It was all about the killing, the murder, and the clash of close-quarters combat. Unsurprisingly, this led him down a very dark path, particularly when compared to those chosen by the other Phoenix Lords. Arhra would quite early have seen that there was a very clear divergence forming, and that he was severely outnumbered. As such, he decided to betray his allies before they had a chance to betray him. He opened up a Chaos Rift in the very first shrine of the Aspect Warriors, the one created by Azamen himself, the Shrine of Azar. And in the ensuing conflict, the Eldar, then still barely babies on the path of the warrior, horrifyingly outnumbered, were defeated and driven away from their very first shrine. Arhra did not have a whole lot of time to savor his victory, however, because the demons were not exactly on his side either, and so he fled into the webway and eventually arrived, through some series of circumstances, in the dark city of Komarog, where he apparently decided that, you know what, the whole shrine idea wasn't necessarily all that bad of an idea. It just required a little bit of refinement, and of course a whole lot of top-down control. And so he created the Dark Eldar shock troopers, the incubuses. And by all indications, he's still training them to this day, hiring out their services to the highest bidder. He would undoubtedly have been a tremendous force in the Dark City's politics, perhaps one even to rival Asdrubal Vect, but Arhra is no longer entirely sane. In fact, he is patently insane. And if he ever were to try and create a major cabal, the others probably wouldn't even bother interfering, realizing that Arhra would go mad and butcher everyone around him within the first weekend or so. Of course, I should also mention that the Dark Eldars themselves have a very different interpretation of events. They believe that it was the Phoenix Lords who betrayed Arhra and betrayed the Dark Eldar. The Phoenix Lords wish to separate themselves entirely from the Dark Eldar, leaving them to the depraved predations of chaos and warp predators, something Arhra would not stand for. A champion of the oppressed and the downtrodden, you see, Arhra elected to leave the Craft Worlds. Who caused that whole demon invasion is, nobody knows, it's a mystery. Baseless Eldar conspiracy theories aside, however, Arhra traveled to Komarog, where he set up his own temple and began taking on worthy disciples. Ergo, he killed everyone else. And he became a staunch defender of the entirety of the Eldar race, not merely the high-minded Craftworld kind, but even the poor Dark Eldar as well, protecting Komarog and its citizens from the malicious influence of chaos, something Arhra fought his entire life against. Until one day, in an enormous, apocalyptic, decisive battle against the very powers themselves, Arhra called for his fellow Phoenix Lords to finally stand by his side once more, to save the entirety of the Eldar species, not merely those who fled aboard Craftworlds. But his treacherous brethren refused to come to his aid, and so Arhra was finally struck down and possessed by demonic powers. When he returned to his shrine, his pupils knew instantly that this was not their kind and benevolent master, who had killed thousands on the steps of the temple, but rather a being of pure evil. And just as they were about to turn tail and flee from this manifestation of horror and cosmic despair, they heard a voice in their minds, their teacher Arhra, ordering them to unleash all of their anger, their fury, their ferocity, and their vengeance upon his false form and cut it down so as to save Commorragh and their species, which of course they did most nobly and gallantly. Thereafter, they would forever continue to uphold the ideals of Arhra as the incubuses. A small problem with this interpretation too is the fact that Arhra's successor, Karandras, has apparently fought Arhra later, which seems to undermine the whole died nobly and self-sacrificingly in the face of chaos narrative. To yet further muddy the waters, by the way, there is also a theory that Arhra is actually still alive, that he did sacrifice himself, but he did so in spirit, taking on a different aspect, eventually becoming Drazhar, the Master of Blades. But we've deviated from the topic quite enough. Returning to the actual striking scorpions, the master that was to succeed Arhra was Karandras. Very little is known of this current master of the striking scorpions, as he apparently hailed from a very minor craft world, and he was not the most skilled, he was not the most ferocious, he was not the most adept or the most exalted of Arhra's many students. But considering again his view of the striking scorpions, perhaps that was for the best, and as things turns out, it was probably for the best, as Karandras introduced a very different approach to the striking scorpions. Yes, they would still channel their rage and their violence, absolutely. They would still be ferocious hunters, but they would be the striking scorpions. They would be stealth predators. They would approach the enemy sneakily. They would spend months in hiding. They would temper their violent excess with good old-fashioned patience and learn to control their darker tendencies in the same way that they needed to learn to control their chainswords, which bucked and screeched and roared in their hands and bit and tugged as it sliced through flesh. In this way, the aspect of the striking scorpion could become stabilized. It could resist the lure of chaos, and it could become a true aspect alongside those of the others, where the majority of Eldar will take up the aspect for a period of time, becoming specialized warriors, but then eventually placing the mantlet back down again, moving on to a different aspect, or preferably a different profession entirely. This should not be seen to indicate, however, that Karandras' school of the striking scorpions is in any way thoroughly inferior to that of Arhra, even when it comes to good old-fashioned frontline combat skills, as illustrated by the fact that Karandras entered into a duel against his former master Arhra on a fallen Eldar world, where the two fought for nearly 3 full weeks against one another, with neither one managing to slay the other. The bout had ground to such a standstill that Karandras too gave up any hope of truly defeating his master, and began instead to plan how he could use his tutor's strength against him. Using insults, goads, and mockery, he drove Arhra into a maddened, frenzied rage, and then picked the precise moment of a minute point of distraction to slip away and become one with the shadows and the concealment around him. Karandras literally disappeared right in front of Arhra, now in a maddened berserk bout of fury. Throwing around desperately to find Karandras, he instead stumbled upon his disciples, who had also been engaged in the duel because, well, Dark Eldar hardly fight fair, now do they? and Arha, seeing no other targets to vent his frustration upon, began slicing through his favoured disciples instead, leaving Karandras to enjoy the show from the shadows. But enough backstory, let's move on to what the Striking Scorpions actually do, how they do it, and what kind of equipment they use to get it done. As already mentioned, the Striking Scorpions are shock assault infantry, but with a twist. Rather than the howling banshees who are delivered directly into combat with their screeching masks to stun the enemy, the Striking Scorpions are infiltrators. They move slowly towards their target over a period of hours, days, weeks, months if necessary. They can even be used to infiltrate highly complex and guarded installations to launch pinpoint precise planned out attacks against key pieces of vital infrastructure or an enemy's command and control systems. This makes the Striking Scorpions an invaluable asset in any truly brilliant Eldar offensive. As before the enemy even know the Eldar are about to attack, their key communication centers, their officers, generals, leaders, and key infrastructure will all be attacked and destroyed in mere minutes and moments before the main Eldar assault. This is, of course, a high-risk, high-reward strategy, a surgical strike the likes of which virtually no other army in the 41st millennium could even hope to carry out, and it places a tremendous burden on the shoulders of the Striking Scorpions, as they have to infiltrate deep within enemy territory, well in advance of any open move by the Eldar, get into position and stay concealed up until the very instant when the violence needs to be unleashed. If they are discovered, then the cat, or in this case the space elf, is well and truly out of the bag and might even endanger the entire operation. But when successful, the effect is immediate and overwhelming. Taking into account the firepower and the speed of the Eldar armies, even just an hour or two's delay in the chain of command or in the movement of vital troops can decide an entire campaign and allow the Eldar to engage on terms overwhelmingly in their favor. A very valuable asset considering just how few of them are left alive. But not all commanders are willing to risk everything on the shoulders of a few dozen warriors. In these cases, the Striking Scorpions still have a role to play, as they do not necessarily need to infiltrate enemy command centers to be of use. Striking Scorpions can cross areas that to other troops would be nothing more than absolute death traps. They can sneak through terrain seemingly impassable and remain entirely undetectable whilst doing so. They can get within meters of enemy front lines whilst remaining perfectly invisible, awaiting the order to strike, overrunning forward positions, front lines, and trench systems in minutes, long before the enemy has any chance to organize a proper defense. This infiltration doctrine is also as much a tool in the Striking Scorpions' arsenal as their armor or their mandiblasters or their chainswords. Whilst the Striking Scorpions are, on average, considerably larger, stronger, and tougher than your run-of-the-mill Eldar, they have to be, as their weaponry and armor are significantly heftier as well, they are nevertheless Eldar, and their frail little bodies respond particularly poorly to being hit with large quantities of solid slug fire. It is therefore vital that they minimize the time they are exposed to enemy ranged weaponry as much as possible. This is one of the reasons as well why there is still melee in the 41st millennium, because it is all about relative advantages. A Striking Scorpion finding himself 100 meters away from an Imperial Guardsman is still going to have several advantages. He has a shuriken pistol, which is more than able to kill a Guardsman at a significant distance. The Striking Scorpion also has access to inbuilt targeting systems within his helmet linked directly to the shuriken pistol. He also has access to his helmet's inbuilt sensor systems, allowing him to see in a variety of spectrums invisible to the human eye. Furthermore, of course, as well, he has full body covering armor. The Striking Scorpion, in even such a scenario, is again still absolutely at an advantage, but in that kind of combat, all that is required to end the life of a creature that measures its lifespan in the thousands of years, that has spent decades, if not centuries, perfecting his art, is for the Imperial Guardsman to tighten his finger around the trigger and for a lasbolt to find an eye lens or a gap in the armor or even simply a flaw in the metallurgy. All of the Eldar's superior instincts, his training, his reaction speeds, his fluidity of motion, etc., 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 is all worth practically nothing beyond his ability to recognize the enemy, raise his pistol, and squeeze his own trigger before the guardsman is capable of doing the same. Such is the leveling nature of projectile weaponry moving at several thousand meters per second. Whereas in close quarters combat, however, the equation becomes something completely different. When the speed of the engagement is moved down to that of swinging a sword, or stabbing with a bayonet, or even bringing to bear a lasgun at point-blank range to try and get a shot off, the Eldar's natural superiority in speed, in reaction, in armor, and in weaponry become near insurmountable advantages. The mandiblaster, for example, the two little pistol-like weaponry mounted on either side of the Striking Scorpion's helmet, is able to fire off thousands of tiny little miniaturized needles, each and every one of which is a conductor for a powerful laser blast. The needles themselves are essentially harmless, as is the laser too. It is a high-powered but short-intensity weapon that will leave at worst a bad scar on a human skin. But what might be a minor annoyance during the best of times can be a life-ending distraction in the worst. Imagine trying to defend yourself whilst hundreds of little needles are peppering your skin and causing severe burns all across it. It's going to make things rather difficult. At the very least, it is going to cause several seconds of pain and panic. Several seconds in the face of a chainsword-wielding Eldar. The simple fact is that for a Striking Scorpion, close quarters combat is the safest place for him to be. It is where his weapons, his armor, his natural abilities, and his tools have the maximum advantage over his enemies, whereas at long range, any manner of unfortunate fates can creep up on him damnably quickly. Enemy artillery, fragmentation bombs, grenades, heavy weapons, bolters, autocannons, etc., etc., etc. Though that is not to say that the Striking Scorpions are completely helpless, even if they are caught out of position. After all, they are infiltration specialists. They are expected to cross large areas of no man's land and sneak close to enemy positions. If they were caught midway by an enemy capable of detecting their movements, or by simple sheer bad luck, a random beam of light that passes over an area of exposed ground just as the Striking Scorpions are crossing it, a particularly eagle-eyed lookout, an unfortunately timed star shell in the sky, and many fates can befall an infiltrating team of Striking Scorpions. In these situations, they are not completely helpless, as this is one of the reasons why they carry the heavy armor. Striking Scorpion's aspect armor is the rough equivalent of Space Marine power armor, you see, in terms of the protection it offers to its bearer. Now, of course, due to the Striking Scorpion's loadout's focus on close quarters combat, they are going to be at a severe disadvantage when it comes to retaliating against that fire, but the armor will prevent them from being all scythed down instantly by enemy small arms, as lasguns and even straight-up bolters will have a hard time penetrating the armor, giving the Striking Scorpions an opportunity to disengage, to find cover, and try a different approach for their infiltration efforts. In more extreme circumstances, it can also allow them to remain in ambush positions, even if the enemy is carrying out a bit of good old-fashioned reconnaissance by fire. The Imperial Guard has been known on several occasions to find particular areas of tree lines to be suspicious, and so beat the shit out of it for a little while with high-explosive fragmentation shells, usually a good way of smoking out any unwelcome surprises. Of course, at this point, we do return to the idea of relative advantages, but sometimes an opportunity for an ambush is simply just too delicious to give up, even if it means you're going to have to suffer through a uniquely hot shower first. And the decision whether or not to stay put in all due likelihood will be up to the Striking Scorpion's Exarch. Like all the other aspect warrior shrines, the Striking Scorpions too have those that have become lost on the path of the warrior, those who can no longer put it down and will instead continue to be fighters for the rest of their existence. Something that the Eldar view to be a particularly tragic fate, as it means that they are now stuck in life, and that they also present a danger to the rest of Eldar society, but the value that they can offer in these trying times of warfare means that they must still be used and employed. The Striking Scorpion Exarchs carry a bit more in the way of specialized weaponry than their fellows. For example, they might replace the Shuriken pistol with the Scorpion's Claw. This enormous gauntlet-like weapon is a power weapon, meaning that it is wreathed in a shielding energy barrier, allowing it both to be used to protect itself from other energy weapons, which would normally make a mockery out of even a Striking Scorpion's chainsword, and it also gives Striking Scorpion's Exarch vastly improved capabilities against enemy heavy infantry, power armor, or even straight-up armored vehicles like dreadnoughts, tanks, walkers, and other forms of armored vehicles. But the Scorpion's Claw does not only improve the Exarch's capabilities in close-quarters combat. The additional strength and stabilization systems allows for a Shuriken catapult to be mounted onto the weapon, giving a considerable increase to the Exarch's ranged capabilities as well, as this is basically the equivalent of switching out a pistol with a full-on assault rifle. But of course, not all Exarchs see the value in this diversification. Indeed, many Exarchs find themselves drawn ever more towards the pure close-quarters combat role. This is in part due to this being the essence of the Striking Scorpion, and because their new armor is imbued with the spirit stones of previous Exarchs, giving them a certain degree of their knowledge, their understanding, and their instincts and their preferences. You can imagine how that might tug and pull at an Exarch to head in a specific direction, meaning that many switch out their chainswords with weapons like the Biting Blade, or even a pair of chain sabers. Many Exarchs will also mix and match their gear dependent on the opposition they're expected to fight. The Biting Blade, being a two-handed weapon, of course, makes it considerably more effective against heavily armored enemies, where you might not be able to afford the Scorpion Claw's more cumbersome nature, as the Biting Blade might not quite match up to its armor-defeating capabilities, but it's going to be a much nimbler and quicker weapon. The pair of chain sabers, of course, takes this idea to its logical extreme, allowing the Exarch to lay about himself with a flurry of attacks, perfect for dealing with huge hordes of lightly armored opponents. These Exarchs must, however, always be mindful of the lessons of Arhra as well, making sure that they never take too much pleasure, enjoyment, and satisfaction in the bloodshed and the murder and the slaughter, lest they follow Arhra, the founder of their temple into damnation. But then again, this pinch of darkness is exactly what makes the Striking Scorpions so much cooler than virtually all the other Eldar aspect warriors, and why they are still my favorites and why I really do hope that they'll get some more love in the future. Who knows, maybe we'll get a sequel to Dawn of War 2 one day. And maybe it'll have Eldar striking scorpions in it. Now, leave me to my grief. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.